Hello, bird nerds. Hello, conservation nuts. Those of you who are going to soon be radical committed activists concerned about invasive species and the preservation of biodiversity. I'm Grant. I'm coming to you from the land of the Wurundjeri people. Unceded lands. Always was, always will be. Joining me today, Adrian Tomlinson, invasive species expert on buffel grass. Thanks for coming into the bird emergency, Adrian.
Hi, Grant. Thanks for having me.
Adrian, which country are you on?
I'm coming to you from Arid country in Central Australia, again unceded and absolutely incredible place. It's a meeting place and a very incredibly powerful, beautiful place, and incredibly. It's just an important place to be in, and it's really important to be thinking about the traditional owners of this area and the lands everywhere around here as we're talking about this.
When we're talking about Arid country, the white fella name for where you are is Alice Springs. Give us an idea of the habitat, the local environment in Alice Springs.
Yeah, it's a really incredible place. So where I am here, I'm about a few hundred meters from the Lerma Todd River, and the town's 500 meters southwest of here, and then just off to the side of that is Ankara, which is a coolabah swamp, and both the Lerma and Ankara are very significant sacred sites, and in the case of Ankara, a ceremony site as well. And yeah, when you think of it, less than 300 mils of rain, but it's this country with overland flows and underground water, so it's well-watered, fertile country. And I sent you a picture of down the river here, and we've got these mighty river gums that got a lot of threats, but they also got a lot of hollows and birds, and it's just they're sacred trees in themselves. And Ankara has got these wonderful big coolabah trees growing on them, and as we get into the hills, the diversity of shrubs and understory.
What's happened there? I don't know what's happened there. I think there we go. Now we've got the.
That's what I was talking about.
Being so slow. Yeah, that's the coolabah gums, and that is that actually.
No, river gums.
River gum. Is that floodplain? Is that a coolabah in the background leaning over?
I think they're all river gums. The coolabah swamp Ankara, if you were to just keep walking another few hundred metres through those trees, you'd get there. These are just river gums with their feet into the groundwater that's topped up by the Lerma, which is just sort of, 50 metres in front of these trees. Those trees, we go walking under them, and there's quite a few hollows, and there's a family of galahs that'll tell you to move on and what have you in there.
Now, in that image, Adrian, are we looking at buffel grass and as the understory there?
Yeah, it's we can't see much of the understory, but that's also it does tell a lot of stories there. So there's sort of mowed parkland clearing in the background, but in the foreground there's very heavy buffel infestations. But that's actually the Alice Springs Landcare Group work in that area, and they've basically taken the buffel for a couple of times now away from the trees, and so we're getting some native daisies and things coming up in there, and salt bush and things. I don't know if we can see them in that photo, but so that's evidence there of both land care and buffel removal and some remnant buffel grass. But this has been really important because there's many little fires, or at risk of becoming very big fires in that buffel. And when the buffel burns at the base of those river gums, as much as it's just a grass, it will actually bring a tree down. It gets into the inside of the tree, and then it can burn for days. So the trees are like chimneys, and they're letting oxygen get right down into the roots. And just the other day, in fact, we had a very sacred old river gum just the other side of Naripa, Heavy Tree Gap, which burnt for 5 days, and no one knew it was burning, but it was smouldering away underground, and then it reflared.
So that's one of the questions that, or the issues that we need to talk about with buffel grass. It's we'll come back to the way the fire impacts both the standing vegetation and then that issue with recruitment of replacement plants once the fire has gone through, and all that stuff later. But one of the things people had asked me to put to you, Adrian, was with the widespread infestation of buffel, and we'll have some more images about it later, which are the native grass or other herbaceous or grass-like plants that are being replaced, and what's the method that the buffel uses to suppress those other species?
Yeah, it's an incredible plant. Like in Africa, it's a sacred plant to the tribes people in the area where it comes from, and it grows in different soils with cattle and fire, and they manage it. It's got competitors, but here it is quite like it hasn't got competition, I suppose is the thing. It's new and doesn't have many natural enemies, but it's an incredible plant. It just grows really dense and thick, and so basically crowds out, or a lot of the custodians use the word smothered. It basically just smothers everything around it. It's just so dense and no light and thick roots. So many of the local plants, the other grasses, get out competed by it. So that's its first step. But then it cures very quickly, and it puts on an incredible amount of biomass and burns with an immense amount of energy. So it burns too hot, and so the plants that didn't get smothered, like the river gum there, or when the fire comes through, it burns too hot, and so it'll disadvantage those trees or shrubs, and it will come back quicker and thicker after the fire. So basically, its modes are, well, I say smother, burn, repeat, but more or less, it's the beneficiary of any possible event almost that you can imagine. And then I suppose the other part of that story is, if you think of grasslands, also grazing or slashing or whatever, once again, it freshens it up. At the land care site where I work, we've observed that when you slash it, then more seed will be produced than if you were to just leave it to get old and senesce. And in fact, that's in best management practice for buffel on the station country. That's what they recommend you do. You need to graze it regularly to keep it growing strong. So smothering, burning, and any slashing or grazing all benefit buffel and help it push everything else out. And when we say everything, we more or less mean everything. There's a complete landscape transition.
That's what I wanted to pin down first, and before we get back to verifying your status as an expert in this field. as a southerner in Australia, and we think about the open, arid lands, and we think about spinifex and kangaroo grass, themata, maybe some danthonias, or they're Austro-danthonias nowadays, aren't they? I think. Are they the native competitors of buffel grass, or are we talking about a specific habitat where it's more herbaceous plants that would be the indigenous occupiers of that space?
I I don't think it's that selective. Like like at the Landcare site, we've got 120 different species of many native grasses, but then like around here, we've got the I use the common names, but like the tar vine and all these little salt bushes and things that would naturally be in the understory, and in the riparian areas, we've got where there isn't, you get all these stenodia and bush mint and things, and they all basically get disappeared under buffel. It's I understand it prefers sort of a more fertile types of landscapes, but our experience is that it gradually colonises pretty much everything. And then when you get into those more woody areas like the mulga, traditionally they, as I understand it, weren't meant to burn, but the buffel gets onto the fringes of those, and then you get the buffel going up into the foliage and getting areas that shouldn't burn or should burn very infrequently, burning quite frequently.
So we've got to talk about the way buffel spreads, and then control measures and economic impacts, all those kind of things. But first, Adrian, can you give everyone a bit of a background on yourself? Like how did you get to Alice? Are you an Alice Springs long-time native, and then have you been working in Alice for most of your career?
Yes, I've been here. Alice is home. I've been here, I guess, probably my partner's born here as well, but I guess we've been here, I don't know, pushing on 12 years now. I grew up in Noongar country north of Perth. People might know Wanneroo and then Garra Mound. So I guess wherever I go, the water's underground, like here. It evaporates from the surface, and that was the same where I was in Wanneroo. It was like so sandy, if ever it rained, it just soaked into the groundwater. So I guess I've always grown up in areas like the Todd River here, where you get these mighty trees and sandy type landscapes. But my work there, I've worked basically in water resources management and for the Swan River Trust in Perth, and then basically ended up in the Northern Territory and worked for in water allocation planning for the Northern Territory government, which was learnt a lot. Now I sort of tend to be strongly advocating against many of the plans that are now in place. But yes, I worked there for a while, and then at the Arid Lands Environment Centre, I was CEO there for a couple of years. But now I'm more, as much as the Arid Lands Environment Centre is great work as a grassroots community organisation, now I'm at another level of grassrootsness. I'm supporting two basically community groups, the Buffel Action Network and Letters for Environment Central Australia, who are loose affiliations, I guess, of people trying to draw attention to local issues and act locally. And in the case of Buffel, act locally, and many of the other ones, but also pushing on to there's big national connections. So we need change at all levels there.
So those groups that Adrian just mentioned that he's working with now, their Facebook groups, and the links are in the YouTube descriptions. For Twitch viewers, I'll have to pop it in later on for you to get in the vibe.
And I would love to. That's what I was going to say. I mean, great if anyone wants to follow, because they really are national issues, and Central Australia's, and I think what goes on here is relevant to everyone. And I also want to mention, I guess I'm now dedicating my time to it, but my wife has been doing an awful lot of work, Jackie, on those, and as well many other community people too. So there's a lot of work there that I wanted to acknowledge.
Before we move on, Adrian, can you give people a bit of a sense of what the Arid Lands Environment Centre does and what kind of a body it is?
So it's, I guess environment centres look a bit different in different jurisdictions. In the Northern Territory, there's the Environment Centre NT, which is in the top end, and then in Central Australia, and advocating across Arid Lands, is Arid Lands Environment Centre. They're a not-for-profit organisation that's been around for over 40 years, and they do, strongly speak truth to power on advocacy. They advocate on a range of issues, many of which are similar to the ones I'm doing. And also they have, I guess, probably a more, big focus also. That there's two community gardens, which are also four within Alec's world, where the, I guess, more sort of softer and engaging side of, what it takes for good environmental management.
And so it's not a government body, like it wasn't born out of federal or state government. It's sort of come out of the land councils. Is that
no?
Correct?
The land councils are another world altogether. It's just as far as I'm aware, self-organised. Like they developed a constitution. It's member-based, not-for-profit organisation. They've got around 350 or 400 members, as I recall. And so just a way of the community organising to, in a way where we can, have some influence at levels where it's sometimes hard for an individual to do it.
And I guess, like all community organisations, they have to seek funding to operate, and are chasing grants from all sorts of bodies and organisations. That's pretty right. They used to recently. It's a bit of a political thing. You've probably heard about the Environmental Defender's Office and others. It seems to be becoming a bit ideological. Who, whether you support organisations like ALEC or the Environmental Defender's Office. And recently, ALEC used to have a grant for a policy officer to basically participate in statutory referrals and be on water advisory committees and review applications and things when they came up. And that's a really important function. Basically, it's just been defunded by the new government, that role. And I think that's really wrong-headed. I always talk about that funding, but basically it's a market failure where you'll find that industry groups and people who stand to profit can stave a journey when it comes time to giving feedback on a plan or whatever, because they stand to make money from it. But the non-humans and I guess general public have a very strong stake in all these proposals that are impacting arid lands, and it's right that someone should be resourced to actually analyse these proposals and these plans from that lens and give some feedback. And I know when I worked for the Northern Territory government in water allocation planning, I really valued the great work that ALEC did in participating on water advisory committees and the like. And I know working at ALEC the value the government got for that work. So
like in a way, it's like an iron goal from the government. Like, sure, they might silence dissent on dodgy proposals, but it means that decisions will be worse because there's no one, or people have to self-organise to speak for the environment.
Okay, well let's get back onto buffel grass and why it's such a I want to say an imminent threat, but it's an ever present threat to not only the habitats, but the plants, animals, birds, and the wider sort of interconnected network of streams, subterranean organisms, for one key reason, and that's the way it burns. Have I got that in a sort of non-scientific layman's sort of explanation?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I probably, like, I think the burning is the mode, and it's horrific because it's so hot, and where the traditional owners talk about, the insects or grubs are living underground and like just burns too hot and they get cooked or suffocate. But yeah, the fire, I guess, is when it all happens. But it's this whole growth cycle of just it rains and it gets green and you can almost watch it growing, and then within 3 months it's cured and it's ready to burn again. So it's just, it's just its density and then the frequency of burns and its propensity to spread. I guess this is a relevance to your wider audience, is buffel could grow in 70% of the mainland Australia, and it's in all mainland states and territories already. So this is this is an issue that we need to get on top of, and the sooner you do it, the better. Like around here, it is just this carpet of buffel, and in real time we're watching these woodland areas just disappear. Like the trees will be dead and don't come back. They get replaced by acacias, or they start coming back and they burn again. And so we're very quickly watching it move from the quite heavily wooded areas, and then these really delightful, complicated riparian areas just turning into this monoculture, and which will keep moving.
So, is the ignition point for buffel lower than some of the other grasses? Like, anyone who's seen spinifex go up would know that that spinifex burns hot and fierce, but it's a different kind of burning, isn't it? What's happened? Sorry, I just popped up the share screen and it disappeared. That's not very good. I'll just get that up again.
So can you hear me?
I can hear you.
I keep talking then? That's a really good question, because I had this discussion with Dr. Christine Schlesinger, who is the author, I think, of that piece that you just brought up then. But I guess the way Christine emphasised it is you can't decouple the frequency from the intensity. It does burn hot, but where the spinifex will take years to recover to the point where it'll burn that hot again. The buffel both burns hot and it recovers and burns hot again. So it's just like a double whammy, if you like. And
While we've got this image up, and this is again from nearby, I think, to Alice Springs, isn't it? This shot on the conversation article. But for anyone who's done any driving through arid Australia in recent times, they will recognise that pale, dried off grass, and I mean it's a year, 18 months ago, Adrian, that I was off travelling with Millie Formby, and we went through. We went from Cairns across to Isa, and then Tennant Creek. Catherine went to on the Barclay Tablelands, and buffels all you see when you look across from the window of a car, isn't it? I mean, everything is buffel. So
yeah, I mean, there's a couple things in there, like it is, and one of the things that's a bit of a frustration for me is you drive along the Stewart Highway, and that area is subject to like fuel reduction burning or slashing, and so these are actually two of the finest ways to grow buffel. So I guess one of the frustrations is I do suspect that as you drive along the Stewart Highway, once you get past the South Australian border, you're looking at like some really bad examples of buffel invasion. But yes, it's a real carpet, and it's there. I drove out west to Mount Liebig, about 300 k's west of Mataranka here on Monday, and yeah, it's pretty devastating. It looks absolutely devastating. Like there's huge tracts of that which are invaded in that way, and then the bits where there's been fires, it starts to look like what you're looking at there. In other areas, there's still lots of trees, like lots of white wood, white gum, and looking at gidgee trees and what have you with the buffel underneath it. And we know that the buffel fires are inevitable, and then next time we come back, we will see less of those trees. And then there are other areas where the buffel hasn't invaded yet, and that just highlights the urgency to crack on and sort this out.
So the danger with the fire, let's point out exactly why buffel is a problem rather than other grasses, because as we know, fire is a normal part of the Australian environment, and indeed the traditional owners of all of this arid country have used fire as a management tool for millennia. So what is it particularly about buffel that makes those fires, the fires fueled by really dense infestations of buffel, dangerous for not only vegetation but for everything that lives in the soil?
Yeah, I think just about start at the end there. Like that was like your point about cultural burning as a historical, as part of, as you say, the management of the land. And this is, in a way, one of the great injustices of this buffel grass is I can fully understand a custodian looking at a site and saying that buffel needs to be burnt because that's what you might have done when the grasses were too dense. But the buffel just burns too hot and burns too frequently. So there's an absolute justice issue there, is actually like you're taking away the potential for the custodians to actually manage their land because it is a new thing that responds wrongly. Like I think it's pretty straightforward. It just burns too hot and it burns too frequently.
But if I can maybe rephrase the dilemma for the traditional owners, and that by undertaking a cultural practice that they would normally expect to do, they potentially make the infestation worse because of the adaptability and the ability to outcompete any other of the grasses that might be present in the seed bank in the soil. So over time, you're just left with a a monoculture in that understory, and that is buffel.
That's it. That's exactly right.
So, how has the knowledge transfer been in your direct experience, Adrian, with the Indigenous land managers understanding what we know from science around the world about the sort of negative effects of a regime of management by burning for buffel, and I appreciate, and people will probably say, yeah, but that's how they manage it in Africa and actually some other places where buffel is a prized and valued food source for livestock, but it's different because they have competitors and they also have different soils. I mean, so buffel wins the competition in Australia. That's really the issue. But I guess a better way to ask the question is there a real conflict for the Indigenous land managers in wanting to use that cultural management tool of burning, but then being confronted with a knowable result of that activity?
Yeah, I think. I mean, I'm not fully involved in all of that. I guess there are two things I'd point out. I know there was actually a big fire meeting down on AP Wildlands just last week, and I understand that the problem of buffel and fire was coming up there. I guess the other part of it, though, is sounding the alarm on buffel. There's like the TOs were the first to point it out, really, and I guess that's a contribution away that a lot of the community and organisations like the Arid Lands Environment Centre and Indigenous Desert Alliance have done, is to listen and respond to the concerns. I don't know if I shared it with you, but there's this Umawa statement. Do you mind if I read a paragraph of it? I think we got.
No, go for it.
Just here. It says. There we go. There it is. This is a poster from our market stall. But it basically says, we, the First Nations people of the desert, did not bring buffel grass to this land, but it is here and it is killing our country and threatening our communities and culture. It was brought to a country to feed cattle and keep down the dust, but it has spread across much of our land. It is traking our country. We can't get bush birds where we used to. Honey ant, marla, red kangaroo, and our native plants are getting harder to find. Our wildflowers are disappearing. The buffel grows too hot, grows too fast, and burns too often for our country. It is the first plant that grows after rain and fire. It is killing our country, and while we didn't bring it here, we live with the consequences. We need support to get our healthy country back. And then it goes on, and it gets more devastating. Our people mourn for the country that used to be. The plants and animals, the special and sacred plants, are covered in buffel, where once many native plants grew. We can't take our kids out to learn country. The hunting tracks are covered, and the plants that sustained us for thousands of years are disappearing. Our kids are growing up seeing only country of buffel grass, and it's getting harder to teach our kids the stories of this country. It's threatening our culture. We didn't bring it here, and our people are suffering the consequences. We need support to keep our culture strong. And then I might stop now, but buffel grass is growing all around our communities. It grows right up to our houses, in our backyards and front yards. Kids can't run around like they used to. It hides snakes. We can't get around fires. We can't escape it. We suffer health problems like asthma from the buffel flowers and smoke from the fires. So I guess what I was going back to your question there is that there's a strong awareness that buffel is problematic for all of this, and I guess very hard, not sure what to. I think everyone's in the same boat here. What do we do with this? It's a fierce opponent. To its credit, it's sort of just like our eucalypts when they go to California or Spain or somewhere. That it doesn't have the same enemies, and yeah, it's thriving. There is, as it becomes a monoculture, then I guess in itself it becomes vulnerable to counter invasion, and it suffers nutrient rundown. So potentially other grasses like the oat grass can, in time respond. But right now, so many species are reeling from it. So I might have strayed a little bit from your question, but yes, it's highly problematic for fire, and I guess probably the main strategy of the Indigenous Desert Alliance and others is stopping the spread, stopping it invading into those uninfested spots, and then I think if you're burning it, it's highly problematic. The only way you should burn it is if you're going to follow up, treat it with, because it springs back green. You can poison it then if that's what you want to do.
We'll talk about the control in a bit, but I just want to point out to people that we're talking about with Adrian about the Alice Springs in the Northern Territory, the APY lands that you referenced, South Australia and part of Western Australia. But it's spreading into arid and semi-arid New South Wales and Victoria as well, and it's already well established in Queensland on the rangelands. So it's a massive problem from an environmental point of view, but also an economic point of view when we talk about some of the impacts for agriculture. But what we might try and do, I haven't seen this film. Do you want to have a look at the buffel grass impacts on APY communities?
Sure.
Okay. Well, we'll give it a go and make sure it plays nicely.
Nanga buffel grass na paloro charpang ngana borang Australia pana iri dinga jo yang lain ka charpang puri bla wiru juta ngana ba wianu panti wiru juta mono balang buffel grass nango ana juta bo mbelonda.
It was beautiful before.
Yes.
And now it's changed. And we are really sad.
Until you see it with your own eyes, there's no pictures or video that can really convey the scale of the issue up there. It's in some cases largely a monoculture of buffel grass near on as far as the eye can see.
Buffel grass was introduced in about the 1980s to suppress dust around the communities, and it's done that pretty well. But since then, it's spread out from communities, and it outcompetes the native grasses.
We don't see real one, long time we were good grass, now it's only one grass.
It's not even a grass, it's just an evil weed, because it ruins the ecosystem, it ruins so little young foods that are grown there, like Cumbrotas are on the decline. We don't realise that. And all the pretty flowers that we have, where buffel is growing in lots of places, we don't have that anymore.
What happens is when buffel grass burns, the tops get burnt off, but it's got a really big root mass underneath. And once the top gets burnt off, it's got those roots to come back quickly, and it comes back really quickly. As opposed to the native grasses that have to come back from seed and might take a couple of years to come back, the buffel grass can come back within weeks of being burnt.
We try to kill him with a fire, it still come out.
Oh.
It's really strong grass around.
Oh.
Buffalo loves Warrell. It loves the fire. It goes, oh what, this is my friend and I'm just gonna go.
It actually burns plants and kills plants that under natural fire regimes and conditions would actually survive. They'd get a bit burnt, but they'd still come back after the fires. Obviously, if you're losing native plants from the system, there's a flow-on effect to the animals as well. So it's been observed, particularly in the APY, significant reductions in birds, lizards, and a variety of other native species.
It's hard to go hunting now. It's not like it used to be.
And we are losing some cougar meat for anang. Some disappearing. I don't know where they go.
The other big component in terms of fire is the risk to communities, remote and outback communities. Obviously, if you've got increased fuel loads, increased frequency of fire, then there's potential for increased impacts on humans.
But I don't know how many, might be thousands.
That's why we're making chemicals to poison them in every side.
Herbicides are largely the best control option in terms of efficiency. There's also, hand pulling in certain situations where there may be, rare or threatened species that you certainly don't want any off-target damage to.
Secret place to them.
And another big component of buffel grass management is hygiene, particularly in regard to vehicles. So, making sure that where possible you avoid driving through any areas infested with buffel grass, because obviously you will ultimately pick up seed and then transport that out potentially into uninfested areas. So, yeah, one of the big challenges in terms of management and APY is not only the scale, but obviously funding and manpower ultimately. It's important, I think, for the communities to have ownership over the issue, but obviously they need support in terms of financial support for purchase of herbicides and equipment, those sorts of things, but also training. It's a good opportunity for APY communities to be trained up and develop some skills that they can clearly see has a benefit back on country.
Because buffalo grass is grown like army. Because we want the money for all the young people to train. We want to come together training Kojunga and we want to train one people together and how do we fix the army? We got to fight like army too and kill that buffalo grass.
Well, I don't know about you, Adrian, but I thought that was a terrific film and gives a much better idea than us talking about it. I think could have given the scale of the problem for community.
It's absolutely right. I think it's not much point paraphrasing it, and the only thing more is actually looking at it itself. But it's completely it's tragic and epic in scale, and all that stuff like the language is in.
It's potentially an ecological catastrophe for so much of the country, but it's a catastrophe for the people who have to live amongst these infestations that just produce an understory monoculture. And for traditional life, it's going to make it very difficult for those communities to, in fact, persist, isn't it? Because if they cannot procure bush foods and successfully hunt anymore, then town life is the only option for them, isn't it?
Well, I can't really speak.
Well, we're presuming,
but yeah, totally. I can't, the powers of resilience and options. I'm not sure, but just in terms of the impact, what you describe is absolutely right. Like as we were talking before, like in the fundamental determinant of health outcomes is basically healthy culture, and healthy culture is underpinned by healthy country. And it even goes back further than that. I guess like your ethical and ontological frameworks more or less are disappeared. Like the language is bound up in what's around you, and your ethics are bound up in all the stories of what goes on in that area, and it's all disappearing. So, like not, maybe like the rocks, like even literally someone from down near Wataka was talking to me about how the buffel, when it burns, when it hits the Morini sandstone where there's a rock art or paintings, they flake off and disappear. So it's not just even the living, as the Westerners understand it, not the biome. It's even that sort of thing, chemical weathering happening because of the buffel, changes to flows, loss of scouring of water holes.
Yeah, that was how I was going to bring the conversation sort of back towards the bird emergency kind of slant. Now, this headline on this conversation, the conversation article, which we've got on screen, shows the scale of the ecological issue that we always hear about bushfires in regions that we are familiar with, that we have visited, and that we might have friends and family living in. But there are fires that are driven by buffel that are as large in terms of area of any of the fires that we see regularly covered in the capital city news bulletins. And what that means, because they're so intense and so hot and so fast moving because of the nature of buffel, is that small creatures just don't really have a chance. Small ground birds, slow-moving lizards, grubs. I'm leaving out thousands and thousands of species, but because of the heat of the fire, and as it was explained to us, that there is this great big root mass below the soil. So not only does the foliage, the above ground part of the plant burn, part of the underground part of the plant burns, and it burns super hot. And that heat also burns the roots on any of the other shrubs and trees that manage to hold on in between the process of being crowded out by buffel. So the ecological impact of these fires is every bit as great as the old growth forests burning or heathlands burning in other parts of Australia. But it's largely invisible and unknown.
Yep. Yeah, I mean, that's summarised it perfectly. There's, in fact, just last month there was another, maybe it's only 2 weeks ago, start to lose count of them, but to the west of here in the Western Chiricha National Park, and I guess beyond the park as well, there's a fire that's probably about 70 kilometres in length. In October the year before last, actually some of the same country, burnt, and it burnt right up, the northwest side of Alice Springs burnt, and there was a day where we had a northerly, and like if it had decided to spring up, it could have whooshed all the way through town, and then a couple of months later, out northeast of here, out on Daly Station Country in the East Macs, all burnt, and so we had this fire on our border. So this is like 3 fires of that scale, even post this one that story is about from 2019, I think. So it's just incredible. And you look at that river gum there, and that's, I don't know how many 100 years old, but that's the ones with the hollows in. And so bring it back to the birds. So I was reading, there's 37 species of birds and microbats depend on tree cavities in inland Australia, and those cavities aren't going to come back before there's another fire. So there's that side of it as well. And then on the, in fact, those river gums is the same thing I was reading. So in that, I think it was related to that story. Christine Schlesinger had been studying those ones, and from the fire, 54% were destroyed, and the remainder lost 79% of their canopy. Then you get away from the rivers, and like the mallee specialist birds, insect eaters, and seed-eating birds are absolutely suffering because the lack of diversity of grasses and other plants that Buffel's replaced.
And the way that Buffel establishes and so rapidly fills up all the available space, whether or not natural recruitment for these eucalypts that will eventually bear hollows or provide hollows is far less likely than it was in the past. So even though we're using a metric of maybe 80 to 100 years for a river gum to start having hollows large enough for some of those larger species to utilise, like cockatoos, for instance, and maybe some of the owls if they're out there, but they are probably going to be replaced at a far lesser rate than they were in the past. So those populations will never bounce back unless there is artificial hollows provided, and that's just so costly. Not only to buy them or to make them, but to actually put them in place, to find places to put them if the tall timber has been burned, and then to sort of monitor them and make sure they don't get lived in by non-target or pest species. So it's I pulled myself up a little bit when I wanted to use the word catastrophe, but it's a slow moving catastrophe, and it's almost unknown. And in Melbourne, Sydney, probably less so in Brisbane, but probably Canberra as well. I want to take this opportunity, Adrian, before we move on a little bit more. If you want to ask a question, make a comment. That's what the comment sections are for. I can have a look at them and bring them up, and we can talk about whatever you've got to say. Adrian, did you want to extend that point?
Well, I guess I'd say, you're absolutely right, and it is a tragedy. When you drive up the highway, there's areas now where there've been enough fires in these riparian areas where you can see what it looks like. There's just like carcasses of old trees standing and no river gums and heaps of erosion and just a sandy little channel with buffel either side. So it's it's happening before our eyes and very, very quickly. So there's urgency. I guess probably one of the things that we've always that's important in this is hope. And I guess to me, there's multiple ways of hope. Like the first one is about just there's a lot of country that's not invaded, and so I guess obviously it's like controlling any like controlling COVID. Like the first thing you do is contain it and stop it spread, and then you protect the assets within it. So I guess that's one of the things we have to do, and that is so urgent. Like, you can just drive not far from here at all and see really important places that are just on the cusp of invasion now, and so they really need us to work now. But then the other hope is as well, like because it's been, like people have been almost afraid. Well, not afraid. I don't know what it is, but there's this sort of like the people who spread it, I guess, are quite small in number, but individually, to me, powerful, and so we don't want to upset the pastoralists by trying to manage this terrible thing. So we haven't done the research to the extent we should about it, I don't think. And so there's heaps that can be done to manage buffel, like in terms of how we treat it, how we like learning about it, and responding to it. Like they've just started spending, the NT government is putting 750,000 a year in now, and under the Saving Native Species program, they're trying to protect species in Chiricha from it. But the investment has been very small considered the scale of the problem. And then even long-run things like as we say, monocultures are vulnerable, and it relies on nutrients, and maybe it's having a bit of a honeymoon period. And we do know as well there are biological controls. There's even natural or enemies already to this plant in going here. Like we've got buffel dieback and the buffel seedhead eating caterpillar, and like the pipeline for developing a biological control done properly might take a decade, but they're the sort of things we should be thinking about. As biological controls get introduced in agricultural sectors all the time, but suddenly when it comes to buffel or environmental ones, there's a reticence that, I guess I think just given the scale, that's where we should be talking. And in fact, there's a threat abatement advice. Buffel is recognised under federal legislation. It's in the novel biota key threatening process, and there's a threat abatement advice for buffel grass, which, the top one is it said establish a task force, and so that's what we'll be calling for at the next election. But then it goes through the research that's needed, including biocontrols, biological controls, and stopping spread, managing sites, investing, declaring it a weed in every jurisdiction, which fortunately Northern Territory has now, South Australia has some time ago. So there's a heap that can be done.
You opened the door to where I wanted to go, talking about agriculture and the value to agriculture of buffel, but also on the other hand, the threat to agriculture for buffel. So what is the main conversation in the Northern Territory context about buffel in agriculture? Is it seen as an asset, like a necessary part of operating a grazing business in the Territory?
So, like there, I guess the main conversation that we have is like when it, like we're not, like sure there's cattle stations, but like at the end of the day, we're not an agricultural economy. There's like it's less than 2% of the GDP comes from the pastoral industry in Central Australia. So there's there's culture, tourism, health, and buffalo impacts all of those things. So the first conversation is, well, what are we talking about agriculture for when it's an existential threat? But then obviously this is a stakeholder on those areas, and so it's like it is a very valid thing to think about. And I guess the narrative probably goes back in the 70s. I'd say pastoralism was basically failing. Like there was incredible dust storms, erosion, and buffel was introduced, I guess, as a panacea for like land degradation, in dry periods and probably overstocking for some time, damage to soils. So buffel was being brought in, and to some extent, like I've read it I mean, I'm not a pastoralist, but I read the quotes, and two ones published were saying like, yeah, buffel saved us. Like we were without it, we weren't viable, and we were blown away. So buffel came in, and I guess it still is about, it is valued as a feedstock. When you look at the literature, it's a bit questionable for multiple reasons. One is, I guess, it's got got some value as a nutritious feedstock when it's green, but it's not that great when it's dry. It has problems with oxalates, which cause a big head and what have you. So it's like got some risks, and it also runs down over time. Like as the nutrients come down, like in parts of Queensland, they've like significantly diminished productivity on established buffel grass as well. So, and the fires, I don't think anyone wants the fires, although it does come back green. So it's terrible for the cows if they get burnt in it, but there is potentially a bit of green feed after it. So, so I think the way I think of it is like, if you want to be sustainable here, then you need to have a model that doesn't rely on buffel.
I was surprised how small the agricultural economy is in the Northern Territory. Can you go over those industry sizes, the percentages again?
I'd have to bring it up, but essentially there's quite a wonderful little database of economic data, but just trying to think if I could find it quickly. I should have printed it out, but yeah, essentially I can put a link to it. Do you have a chat we can put links in? Maybe
See down there, there's a little private chat thing basically above your head.
Oh, just in here.
Yeah. And then I can pop it in as a.
But anyway, I can almost go off the top of my head. So yeah, basically you can break it down to area, not breaking it down to Central Australia, and that's like agriculture, forestry, and fisheries, which basically is cattle is I think 1.4, might be 1.8, but then you get things like health, more in the 12, arts and things are probably similar to agriculture. Then you get other things just like building houses and things. So like it's a very small.
Tourism was the one that I really wanted to focus on. So we've got the tourism and the arts. How much compared to agriculture?
Right, I'm just bringing it up. Let's do this.
And considering that agriculture includes barramundi, crocs, everything else apart from cattle, right? So, and did you say forestry as well? So,
I think that's just how they group it. So I've got
that's
the
just a category, yeah.
I've got the economic value. Let's see what that. I'm bringing up the economic profile now.
Good time for you to make a cup of coffee, folks. And of course, remember, you can pop in questions and comments so that we can address things that you are interested in.
Great, pop it in the group. So this is it. That's the economic data, and it's just whirring away here. Value added.
I'll pull that up. I won't bring it up on the screen.
Anyway,
look at it ourselves so we can talk about it.
Yeah, and it's actually said it's become unresponsive, so I might give that a bit of I'll cut across and have a look at that window in a minute. But yeah, it's a small player, and it's like agriculture across the territory also employs less than 2,000 people. So
okay, so the point of me asking the question and wanting to know is that what you could conceivably do away with agriculture in the Northern Territory. That's really where I was getting at. You could make up the size of that economy by doing community arts centres and tourism on pretty much in every region, or potentially on every homestead, and not shrink the economy is really the point I'm wanting to get to. I understand people don't want to change what they do. So we've got the
yeah. There's a lot in there. One thing that we also need to think about is equity, and there's native title held over many of these pasture leases already, and so what we're seeing is that these stations are worth $15 or $30 million, so they're quite a big deal, and the people held by a small number of people. So they certainly are a group to be reckoned with. But there's and so they're personally powerful, and there's a small monetary benefit there. But if you think about the costs of invasion, most of them are not monetized anyway. So you're basically just deferring the cost to another generation if you're reducing the value of the land, if you go to this group terms. So we did a bit of a back of the envelope approach where we the cost of based on cost of rehabilitation, and this was based on figures from a decade ago. We said $10,000 a hectare to rehabilitate or get rid of a buffel and let it come back. So, and then we looked at how much land, buffel's not mapped, so we don't really know fully where it is. But we thought the cost of invasion, if you were going to remediate it, is hundreds of millions of dollars a year, and if it's a value add the pasture industry of 20%, it might be 20 million onto their bottom line.
But the people who pay for that amelioration or eradication or control, whichever methods are used, are not the people who are the direct beneficiaries of that action generally, and that's why I think these conversations are always they always should be opened up. I mean, the people of Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra, and Perth will bear a greater per capita share of that cost to do this work, and
yes,
and if it's a absolutely minor industry in the greater scheme of things, I think how many people did you say? It was only a matter of hundreds of people employed in the industry.
That's what it seemed to come. Well, but this isn't all ag. It's. I mean, I don't want to treat everyone as an ends unto themselves and not a means. They're entitled to their consideration.
But these are all. Yeah. But these are all the arguments that we always get given about why we can't do stuff, right? About why we can't put money into land reclamation projects or species protection or biodiversity expansion because of the jobs, right? We need the jobs, or it's such an important industry. but sometimes it's not an important industry, and there are cultural valid reasons for people to want to hang on. But to my point of view, if and we need to have this kind of discussion with TOs and communities directly. But if you can employ more people and make more money and look after country better by not running cattle and by having community artists and bird watchers and people who are interested in the local plants coming and doing tours, and you were making the same or more money, why wouldn't you do it?
Absolutely. I mean, I don't disagree with you. And the other part of it is we've only considered one impact too. Like we haven't even talked about the issues of the cows trampling the water holes and sacred sites and not being able to get onto that land. So
absolutely, we never ever cost the economic damage of the agricultural activity. We only ever price the value that we get from it. The cost to community generally is never factored in these arguments, and I think I'm not advocating one position or another. I'm just saying it's time that we had discussions that were all encompassing and where some of the prejudice were put aside, and we were consistent in the way we did our economic comparisons. That would be my point.
Absolutely, yeah. And it needs, I mean, and the other two things, like evidence-based is that it's hard to have a discussion because like I've just like an economic, we've actually been talking about this, and it's I think a really important thing to be done is an economic evaluation that takes into account equity and non-monetized costs. So there's
that's very woke. That's very woke of you, Adrian. There talking about the triple bottom line and equity and inclusion.
But then the other two parts of that, there's this ethical thing about you can't, like, it's not okay to cause an extinction. Like maybe you make $100, like we're not that consequentialist. Like you making money and then killing something is not okay. It's not moral. And then the other part of it is...
I'm glad you said ethical. Let me just stop you there before you go on to the next point. But I'm glad you mentioned ethics. I've actually reached out to a couple of ethics professors who operate in environment. I ask this question to people often, and I never get a consistent answer from them. I'll say to them, do you think it's important that we protect koalas and make sure they don't go extinct? And the answer is invariably yes. And would we want to stop kangaroos from going extinct? Absolutely, yes. Platypus, absolutely, yes. Really important, they're iconic animals. Well, why is the swift parrot any different? Right? Ethically, if it's important to preserve one species from extinction, where do you draw the line about which ones you make an effort to protect? I mean, there's probably undiscovered species that are at risk from buffel grass. So do we just not make an effort because we actually have not described them? We haven't put enough resources into surveying the country that is currently being destroyed. And by surveying, I mean ecological biodiversity surveys. I don't mean pegging it out and putting a claim on it to dig something up.
Yeah, it's back to front, isn't it? Like you should be, it's a precautionary principle. If there's a risk of serious and irreversible harm, you shouldn't do it unless you can demonstrate you're not going to have an impact rather than do it, and then everyone else has to argue back why you can't do it. Like it's completely back to front.
Yeah, like give me a reason why we should protect these. I mean, Donald Trump was a great example of this attitude the other day, a few months ago, I guess it was now, with there wasn't any water available for the fires in California because of the smelt, because of a fish that no one's ever heard of. And then in Britain, they talk about a newt. We can't do anything because of a newt. So, well, you accept that you can't do certain things to preserve, I don't know, robins. The English robin. They wouldn't let that go extinct. They would. I just don't. Yeah. I have not got an answer as to why you must protect one, or why you should protect one, and why you shouldn't protect another. So I've reached out to some experts, Adrian, ethicists, to tell me why.
And it gets down to the values and who's got power, I think, would be my answer.
Yeah. That's the second part of the discussion. That's not the first point. The first point of an ethical discussion is, is it right or is it wrong? Is it true or is it false, right? So let's start there. And then you've got to have all the other complications afterwards. Why would you go against something that is ethical? Well, that's a different conversation.
Yeah, I think it's in government. I think it's definitely something that our policy making isn't sophisticated enough. Like it does get down to some sort of consequentialist, like just basically they don't have many boundaries around them when you get into that other different Aboriginal conceptions of the world or whatever. Like that doesn't count. It's just this has a benefit to somebody, and if we can put a number on it, let's do it. They want to do it.
I got all excited there for a minute, Adrian. I saw a comment come in, and then I had a look, and it's a spam comment on Twitch, and Twitch never lets me down with a spam one. So timeout or a block, or I'll just do I'll put them in timeout. That's just silly. That's one of the rules of the game. Don't bother spamming, because I will ban you if you keep doing it.
Okay, I've got Adrian. The economic data came up.
Oh, good.
So this is Northern Territory wide, ag, forestry and fishing. So that's all your watermelons at Mataranka and Daly waters, and fishery and forestry is 2.9% of the economy. Down from 3.7 in 2007-18, and then like the biggest mining is 30%, public administration 12%, construction 6%, health 10%, arts 1.3%. But I'll just flick that to region T, and then in the anyway, we can keep searching it anyway. It's just becomes even more.
We can probably both do a bit of homework on that and dive into it, and maybe seek out some of the discussions that go on about it. I mean, I've got my view that at a time where we are making transitions because of moving towards renewable energy, reducing carbon impact, looking at bringing in a new range of offsets and biodiversity credits. So while all this stuff is being workshopped and talked about and promoted and then backed away from by political actors, perhaps the time is to throw into the mix whether we actually move away from some industries where ecologists tell us that they probably shouldn't be taking place there, and maybe we have the land use conversation can be a lot broader than it is now.
Absolutely.
And you bring in all those elements about community justice, and I'm someone who I'll just put it out there. I'm very, very sceptical about these people who are third and fourth generation pastoralists who are arguing on a historical or traditional basis that their right to keep doing what they have always done is any more important in the national decision making than somebody who was a third or fourth generation cobbler.
Absolutely, I absolutely agree.
So,
But, yeah, and I mean also remembering this is leased land. It's leased for a purpose.
That's right. It's not land you own, and again, the costs are always shifted.
Yes.
The roads that you use, the ports that you use, the airports that you use if you're exporting with air freight or bringing goods in. It's not the agricultural sector that paid for them. It's the community at large through federal and state grants that supported other grants. Local government grants come from federal and state coffers. So there's a whole lot of mythology in these kind of discussions that is put out there as fact, and a lot of them are stories to justify an outcome, or to justify a previous action as well. So we're great revisionists when we talk about the value of certain industries.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Adrian, I think we've probably come to a good point to maybe wind it up. We should let people know that we are going to do a further conversation, but far more focusing on the traditional owners of the land, and it won't be two white fellas talking about it. So to give you a bit of a hint, so we don't know exactly when that's coming up. And in the meantime, I'm going to do a bit more research on. I kind of got led astray a bit with the agricultural stuff because I'd read some things saying that buffel grass was a threat to pastoralists. So I was a little bit surprised that the agricultural industry might be resistant to control measures. So I want to read a lot more broadly, and not only about the Central Australian experience, maybe looking at what the threats are for Victoria, New South Wales, and the southern parts of South Australia, and then that subtropical and arid integrated area of Queensland.
Yeah, it definitely varies. Like you'll get different attitudes in different areas, and the impacts and management are highly different, whether it's in Queensland or South Australia, or just completely unwanted if it's getting into the
But this thing's a vegetative cadentote. It's not going to respect any kind of boundaries, and it will probably spread a lot faster than is sort of currently predicted. So, yeah.
I think before we wrap up, there's a couple just what's happening now, and for listeners, viewers, right now with an election coming up, I guess there's a lot going on with Buffel actually. So a little while ago, it got nominated to be a standalone key threatening process under the Environmental Protection and Biodiversity Conservation Act. So that's going through a 18-month or 2-year assessment process now. I think a decision gets made in 26. And just because of the weight of species, that's to me really important, because one of the impacts. A lot of the impacts come under that legislation, and through, if that's a standalone process, then a threat abatement plan gets prepared nationally, and then that's got some things that make the government accountable for doing stuff. And then there's also a weed of national significance nomination up for being assessed this year, and they're going to basically make 8 more weeds of national significance, and Buffel's in the running. So for both of those things, these are national issues. So for any listeners or anyone, just keeping this in the public eye over the next 2 years is really important. And then with the immediate election coming up, we are calling for a national task force on Buffel. So we've been talking to a member of the Lingiari here about that at all electorates is something that we can push for as well.
Is that Mulundiri McCarthy?
It's actually Marion Scrimshaw, but
Marion Scrimshaw. But what was it previously? Yeah.
Pardon?
Is she a senator or?
So she's the local. So Mulundiri is a senator. She's a
senator.
Minister
Sorry.
Yeah. And so
that was.
We need to reach out to Mulundiri next week as well.
So I'm putting you on the spot here because we hadn't discussed this or workshopped this, but the election is imminent. I mean, it will be held in May, probably towards the end of May, as we think. Are there viable, independent, pro-biodiversity candidates running in the territory that you're aware of?
Well, I don't know. I know they're still getting their nominations together. There's some great. I've been talking to Chris Tomlinson, who's been a Greens member before, but is talking about running as an independent, very focused on self-determination, but also these cross-cultural environmental issues. So, and like to Marion's credit, she's quite supportive on a lot of this as well. But
I'm a bit of a fan of Marion as well. But the problem for me, and I used to be a card-carrying Labor Party member many years ago, and I was a student union president and was, really focused on party and machine politics for a little while because I believed it was effective. I don't anymore because I think the Labor Party has shown itself that the party discipline that can be so effective in some issues is actually really detrimental on some issues. So that's the reason why I'm asking if there is and I also mean viable. Like, is it possible? Because the Northern Territory is 2 electorates in the lower house, isn't it now? It's Lingari and is the other one called Palmerston or Palmerston North?
So. You sound very at the moment.
But there's one that's basically Darwin, and then there's one that's the rest of the territory, and Marion is the representative of the rest of the territory. So the question is it possible that an independent is ever going to win one of those seats?
Oh, okay. I mean, in terms of, like, I don't want to,
No, we're not picking sides here. We're just sort of saying, like, there are electorates in other parts of the country where independents always have a shot, but there are some electorates where an independent will never, ever win. Well, not probably in a 50-year time frame.
It's I mean, it's going to require a unifying, charismatic individual, I guess. Maybe. At the other point, I think you're absolutely right. Like, we can talk about, well, they might act fairly strongly on buffel grass, but the elephant in the room for us is climate change and both major parties are happily supporting fracking, and it's like adding 22% emissions onto Australia's budget. So like you've got to like that's not sane.
And while that's a Labor Party policy position, the only option for any Labor Party parliamentary member who is opposed is either toe the line or leave. So that's the problem with the party discipline. So, and folks, sometimes we are streaming to both the channels today. Bird emergency people sometimes say, "Oh, why are you talking so much about politics?" Because politics is conservation. You cannot protect endangered species that require money and action and call it anything but politics. So at these times where we have the opportunity to exercise electoral politics rather than pressure politics and direct action, we have to do it. So that's why you'll be hearing a lot of conversations like this. And I'm not asking Adrian to pick a side or get in a cheer squad. We're talking about the mechanics of electoral politics and what is possible in the NT. Because if it's not possible to make a change on the ground electorally, well then that's where you've got to use pressure politics, letter writing, direct action, get out in the streets, because then you've got to let the other people in the party who might be vulnerable know that perhaps we should change our view on this. I mean, it's no secret, Adrian, that I was terribly disappointed in Tanya Plibersek as an environment minister, and I am disgusted with the Labor Party for two things. One of them in New South Wales, where they ran hard and hard and hard on the Great Koala National Park, and just about 3 years into a 4-year term, nothing. They're still logging koala habitat faster than pretty much any time in the last 10 years. And federally, the government did part of what they promised, but they walked away from the hard bit. And they walked away from the hard bit after pressure from a mining state premier. So,
Shame.
Well, it is shameful, and they do not deserve our congratulations for being, well, I'll use the juice media term, shit and shit light, or you don't get any prizes for being shit light. If you walked into your grandma's house and she had white carpet and you had a little bit of shit, dog shit, on your shoes, she wouldn't yell at you any less loudly or vigorously than if you came in with a bigger bit of shit on your shoes. So I know it's a bit colourful and whatnot, but that's the way I feel about the options being presented when we are viewing the choice with biodiversity being front of mind, which is my standpoint. That's my standpoint. Climate change and everything is important, but I believe we need to separate those two actions. Acting on climate will not necessarily mean that we get positive impacts for biodiversity. So that I think we always need to pull those arguments apart and look for positive action on both fronts. So,
yeah, absolutely. I mean, I don't want to make it stretch out too thin, but I guess in these things, like it's to me modal. Like either what you're proposing is enough to not to resolve an existential crisis, or it's not. And if two things that don't keep us safe from these existential threats is not good enough.
No, and I actually think the ALP has done a really good job on climate change, considering where we were 4 years ago. I think that has been really, really, really positive. But I can't say the same thing on biodiversity and conservation generally. And I just think it's important that we try and recognise that we can get one by maintaining that Labor control the government. We can certainly continue with climate change action, but if we have a much greater influence of biodiversity positive candidates on the crossbench, we can force more action on the other one. So,
absolutely,
because I don't think anyone who is biodiversity positive is going to be going, but you know, what we really do need is a lot more fracking in on the outskirts of Melbourne. I think we need that. I mean, anyway. There's a long time. I'm going to examine lots of candidates and lots of policy, and invasive species is going to be a big part of it, because if you don't control invasive species, there is no way we're going to end up with biodiversity positive outcomes. So, yeah, there we go. Did I get too political there, Adrian?
Not at all. We've got to, I think step number one is get engaged and be, I don't want to keep rolling along if you're running out, but, we certainly had that experience here where we were worried about one party and then the next party came in and holy heck, we've got this territory coordinator and, it's actually fundamentally undemocratic. So, whether
it's pretty clear we can't elect one side to government. If you are someone, I've had some discussions recently with people who are not impressed with the statement I'm about to make. I'm going to make two statements, and I get a lot of pushback, but I will die on this hill. Conservatives are the enemy if we are talking about biodiversity preservation and more generally climate action. But there are conservatives who are very committed to climate action because they see it as an economic positive, but they're not wedded in the same way to maintaining or improving biodiversity. And a lot of people say, no, you can't say conservatives are the enemy. And I'll just say, have a look at what the conservative side of politics is doing to America right now. And you tell me anything that we would have ever talked about as being a widely held and accepted social justice or equity issue where they are not destroying it and not doing damage. There's only one side of politics that does that, and it's the same the world over. People say, what about socialists? What about Russia? No one's going to tell me that Putin's not a conservative. No, I mean, Putin is an absolute conservative. The Chinese Communist Party, even though they got communists in their name, they are neocons through and through. Different slant, but they're not allies of the left as we understand it in like an Australian or British or European context. So we have to have better conversations and better, I think, better reviews of the performance of the political parties historically. Anyway, that's well away from bird preservation, but I just believe you cannot preserve biodiversity and elect economic conservatives or social conservatives.
No.
And yeah. anyway, I'll stop there for the bird emergency. I'll stop that point there because I do get a lot of pushback, but I never get any real argument about. I just say to someone, just show me somewhere where the Conservatives have been in charge for 10 or 15 years, and just show me where biodiversity is better, or even the same as when they got into power, and then I'll walk back on this conversation. But actually, Adrian, I do appreciate that you were bringing up hope. Now, you're going to really need to help me with hope, because I'm rapidly losing hope, because I do not see any real commitments being made by politicians. And by real commitments, I mean legislation, money, action, planning. And I also don't see that the things that we have been doing for 20 years or 30 years are working. I don't think the way we do conservation planning and the projects and the monitoring that we do, I don't see them as being generally, and I say generally because there are isolated instances where they are working. Orange-bellied parrot is one of those projects where that appears to be working. But for that species to survive, do we need to every year hatch and release 100 plus nestlings? And at the current rate of development in the coastal zones of the country, can that species survive without the intervention? And so I'm overjoyed. My whole childhood was all about, well, we've got to do something about the orange-bellied parrot. I mean, for 50 years I've been concerned about the orange-bellied parrot, and I'm overjoyed seeing what is happening. But where will the orange-bellied parrot be in 100 years? That's what I would. I mean, will we be able to go to the coastlines of Victoria and South Australia, South Coast of New South Wales, and see orange-bellied parrots that do not have a leg ring that indicates they were bred in captivity? Will we be seeing wild-bred birds? Because otherwise, they're just, to me, they're just a free-flying conservation exhibit, right?
That was actually back on the Buffel. This was like more or less the genesis of these strong statements by Aboriginal people when they were basically reintroducing marla, and they were like, well, what's the point here? Like, you're introducing them into a place full of buffel. They're not going to survive.
These are the conversations that we have to have about all of these projects. I mean, the last update to the endangered species list, right? I remember one of the very first, I think it was episode 3 or 4 or 5, or anyway, it was in the first few weeks of me doing interviews for the Bird Emergency podcast. And it was the fairy tern that we were concentrating on, the Australian subspecies of the fairy tern. And we were making the comparison in that conversation about how the little tern was doing reasonably well. The little tern seemed to be doing well. Well, now, 5 years on, the little tern is on the endangered species. I think it's on the threatened list now, but it's now under threat. And that's because of habitat and climate change. It's because we are crowding these animals out. We're taking all the space. We're driving the 4-wheel drives up and down where they nest, or we're letting our dogs run free. So the birds don't nest there anymore. So now we have to have these controlled areas for birds to nest. And then we only need one catastrophe in an area. You only need one hurricane and one cyclone to come through, one extraordinary sea surge, tidal surge to come through, and there's a whole year's breeding gone. Anyway, so give me some hope, Adrian.
Well, I think the hope was contained to the Buffel thing. I think these foundational things are grim, but I do think the power of the country and listening to the custodians, a bit of modesty from humans and not trying to fix everything and just getting smaller. I don't know. It's where, like if you look at all the graphs and the tipping points, like there's a lot of reason to not have hope. But
Well, I think that's something I probably do too often. Is I'm looking at these graphs and these studies, and the notion of when a population is functionally extinct, and then if we do have populations that are functionally extinct, what should our interventions be? This is where the economic arguments come in. Are those populations better being managed in a way like the orange-bellied parrot? But then you open that up to tourism experience or something, some other way to raise money to help species that are not functionally extinct. I'm not advocating for one thing or another when I bring these things up, but I am saying that the discussions, a lot of the discussions and management discussions are not public. They happen in forums where most people don't know about them, and decisions are made totally apart from the wider community. And and I think we've all got an investment, not only economic investment, but also an emotional investment in these actions and these outcomes. And I think that's just my personal belief. I've changed a lot of my thoughts about this in 3 or 4 years. That I just think governments, and I think research community generally, needs to be more open. And that also means being more open with the communities that live alongside these species, because often the people who are doing the work and are the experts in a way that we understand from a Western science-backed standpoint, they're people who have been brought in, been transplanted in, and they're not the natural neighbours of these species and of these particular habitats or ecosystems. So I don't think it's ever going to happen, though, Adrian. I don't think we've got enough time.
I think there's two things I want to say, though. One is, like, I think people like yourself who are clear-eyed and don't skirt from the truth, it's so important to, like, let's not kid ourselves, like, this is serious. And I say this with love, but going to the Ecological Society conferences, and I feel like, there's a lot of, getting caught up, doing some good work on one species, but getting really skillful about justice and the statutes and things, and like being prepared to hold lines, and is like, I feel like ecologists and scientists and people who really want to do these things, like, we need to get really armed and know the full extent of what we can do. Like, you don't have to just acquiesce to development, and and you need to truth to power within your organisation, like, because it's like, like if you're sick of clearing applications and too much flora and fauna being stressed, then say this is not okay. And I don't know, like it's it takes everyone to act.
But we have set up a structure where open and robust discussion outside of a safe space doesn't happen. I'm always frustrated in mainstream media, legacy media, call it whatever. You never, they pop in these feel-good little segments in the morning shows living in the Northern Territory now, you don't get anything that comes from the Northern Territory these days, do you? I think your news now comes from Brisbane, doesn't it? Except the ABC. I'm excluding the ABC from this discussion, but the ABC is still a fringe dweller outlet, right? Most people in the country are not watching the ABC. So when they do conservation stories, someone will come in with a khaki or an olive green shirt with a hat and holding onto a cute animal, or there'll be a snake, or those kind of bullshit stories that never ever confront hard facts and hard issues. Or they might say, "Oh yes, and this species is under threat." They never say because of farmers, or because of miners, or because of loggers, or because of property developers. They never say that. They just go, "Oh, it's under threat. It's really bad," and you could, sign a petition. Oh, fuck that. Fuck that, and fuck those people who are prepared to do that fucking astroturfing, because that's what it is. And we're well past this. I mean, they're still doing what Harry Butler. I mean, they're less effective than what Harry Butler and the bloody Leyland brothers were when I was fucking 6 years old, right? So I get livid. I'm one of those people who will watch it and I'll shout at the TV, go, oh. And those scientists and those experts who build a platform based on their hard work and hard science to then give it away by doing the feel-good stories. And I'm sure they justify it to themselves that, oh, well, at least I'm getting out there. But you're not, because you're just another talking head, and most of them are pretty or handsome. But you're not giving facts, and you're not giving people calls to action. It's just puffery to whitewash an issue. That's it makes me really, really angry. And I know I sound like a crank when I talk about this, but I cannot believe people can critically watch the media if they call themselves a conservationist or someone who is really concerned about preserving whatever might be your favourite kind of critter or organism, and not be furious with people who have massive platforms. Like, fuck you, Bob Irwin and Bindi Irwin. Fuck you. When are you ever doing anything that fucking shakes a tree? You own a fucking zoo, right? You're not conservationists. You own a fucking zoo. And I'm not against zoos, but zoos are not the spear point of conservation. They're really important when they do really important work. But if we had 500 more fucking Australia zoos in Australia, we would not be any better off in terms of biodiversity. We just have more people taking photos with koalas or emus. So fuck you, Bob Irwin. You're the one who could have made a fucking massive difference. You could sneak in a comment every night when you're in the jungle with all those fucking celebrities. Every time you are live, you could say something, but you don't. and that's why you can get fucked. So sorry if you don't like the language, Adrian, but I passionately believe it, right? I passionately believe it, and I think these people are letting themselves down, and they're letting us down, and they're letting people like David Attenborough down.
Yeah, totally.
Right? So, anyway, there you go. Sorry, Adrian, I've probably soiled your good reputation with the good people of the Northern Territory, being associated with the big potty mouth.
No, I don't think it's I'm not averse to strong language up here. In fact, that was a big lesson when I came up here, is need to talk more direct. You can't be subtle in communicating the risks.
Oh, help! This is totally apart from anything, but when I was travelling around with Millie Formby doing her wing threads around the country, and we were up at Lee Point, and we had a couple of sessions there where some COs were coming in and talking to us, community leaders, and there's a split in the community there on between two sort of groups and for leadership and everything. But there was one fella who was talking to all of us white fellas and white women about what they wanted. And boy, he was blunt and he was direct and he was effective. And nobody giving us a cuddle and coddling us. And so I think I was pretty affected by that, and it made me think a lot about. I mean, I've got a tiny platform, but I'm not going to sit here and try and get some sponsors and stuff. I want to get people on, talk to people about things that I think matter, and then that stuff can hang out there, and we can push it out, and hopefully 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more people see it, and then start taking action, even if it's just ringing up your nominally independent member and say, hey, can you stop voting this way, or can you please make sure you support this particular bill, and get off your couch. Signing a petition online does nothing, so we all feel good about it, but you're much better off getting out on a protest, making a sign, confronting people who are making decisions. You're much better off with that.
Totally. And people take themselves too seriously. I mean, no, this issue's in serious, but I mean, look, the state of the world's serious, but too often, people will say, oh, I work for the government, I can't make a submission on this because I've got to, you don't.
Then quit your fucking job, right?
Yeah,
and I say this to people all the time. People say, oh, I can't do that. I can't do that. It's not. Well, fuck off. Quit your job. I fucking did. Right? I walked away from stuff I didn't want to do anymore. And you can do it. So don't oh poor me. Where were you during the war, Daddy? Oh well, I was very concerned of what I was very concerned I might get shot, so I watched them shoot my neighbours,
Yeah.
No. Saying the F word a lot, but no, fuck off. And I think I get a bit grumpy too, because I know there's people who I really want to talk to on this show, and they won't come on because I'll ask them a question they won't want to answer, and nobody wants to be live, being recorded, not wanting to answer a question that seems like a pretty easy or obvious question. Anyway, we'll just keep happening. We'll see how many politicians actually agree to come on the politics show during the election campaign. It makes it easy for them to say no when I have bugger all followers, right? It makes it, well, you don't want to waste your time doing that. But you never know. People can blow up pretty quick, so who knows. Share, hey, folks, if you're watching this and everything too, I always appreciate when people like my posts on social media. But guess what? Share them. I don't just want you to like them. I want you to repost them and share them. And if you like the videos, you can do something to help me, because I'm just me. Right? I don't have an editor or anyone else doing anything for me. It's just me. On YouTube, you can actually make clips and you can remix things, and I allow everything to be embedded. Chop it up, share it, stick it on TikTok. Do anything. Do anything to get the message out. I say enough swear words to get traction on TikTok, so get on with it, all right? That's your action. That's your call to action for today, folks. Actually, fuck Bob Irwin is probably a good one, and fuck Bindi Irwin's probably better. So if that doesn't go viral on TikTok, you're not trying, all right? So I must remember. I must remember to clip it myself. I'll make sure I do it. Oh my goodness, Adrian, anything? And I wasn't winding up before. I'm quite happy to keep having a discussion for as long as you want to. I just thought that we can probably do buffel grass better when we bring some more people into the conversation. But in terms of a wide-ranging conversation, let's go back to hope and let's go back to action. If people want to support you or any of the other groups or individuals working on buffel grass in the territory, let's say particularly in the territory, what should they do? They should follow you on Blue Sky, shouldn't they?
Yeah. And then there's, as we said, the buffel. I think you put up the Buffel Information Action Group and Letters Environment of Facebook groups.
Yep, the links are in the YouTube descriptions right now. You can go and join those Facebook groups.
And then there's the Arid Lands Environment Centre, strong advocates for buffel grass and do need support. As we say, we've got big things going, the Weed of National Significance and the Key Threatening Process nomination. They're national things. So if there's anything you can do to promote the issue of buffel and let your local members or whatever know that buffel is important to you. And every jurisdiction, every state should be declaring buffel grass a weed, and the less it's invaded already, the better it is to do it, because the resistance will come once it's established and some people are benefiting from it. Declare weeds locally. And then this election, we'll be calling, and again, anything you can do to get a buffel grass task force, a national task force in place to push this issue forward on the national stage is important. And
Invasive Species Council.org.au. It's invasive species. invasivespecies.org.au is the website. That is an excellent place to start to get yourself acquainted with not only buffel grass, but all of the other vegetation threats and the huge amount of invasive species and the damage that they're doing here. Internationally, because I know people from around the world end up watching these clips, just hunt out. There's just about every country, whether it's part of your government or whether it's an NGO, has a body like the Invasive Species Council, and a lot of the universities particularly in Africa and in parts of Asia, have faculties dedicated to research and action for invasive species. So just do a little bit more than scrolling social media. Use Google or DuckDuckGo and look past the first page of results. And if you are a voracious reader and you like facts, here's another tip. Get onto Google Scholar and type in some topics, and you can search by time period. Like you can look for just this year, the last couple of years. You can get current stuff, or you can go back and look historically at the kind of work that is being done, and you'll discover a whole lot of people who are writing papers and doing research on any number of topics. But let's start with buffel grass and invasive species if you want to. And you can go down your local library and you can do it there if you don't have good internet or something at home. Good action points.
And yeah, I think two things. Like invasives are like, they're not, it's kind of subtle, but like the impact of invasive species and particularly invasive pasture grasses are just so significant. Like, they're not as dramatic as some other obvious environmental impacts, but their impact is so huge. Like, I think should be a real focus of people who are concerned about biodiversity invasives. But then going to buffel, there's a whole story on like buffel grasses invaded all through Mexico and Texas and the Sonora Desert, and then in the South America, like wherever there's cows and pastoralism, buffel seems to go. And then there's like the land care groups and the Buffel Information Action Group there. There's these groups like the Catalina Buffel Slayers in Nevada, or somewhere in the people working the Sonora Desert. And yeah, so and then places like Hawaii, the Hawaii fires were invasive grasses, including buffel. So this is a very international issue.
Yeah, and Hawaii, it's heartbreaking to see what's happened to the indigenous flora and fauna of Hawaii as a result of colonisation. It's so many species just gone, just lost. So, yeah, let me see. I see a few more people have been jumping in. So, YouTube folk, what do you think? Actually, let's do the controversy. Thumbs up or thumbs down for the following. Fuck you, Bob Irwin. Right? That should get you off the lounge chair, or if you're at work with one earpiece in and doing something, you can at least tell me if I'm being a dickhead and being very unfair or not. Adrian, what have you got events coming up?
We have. This is so with the little Buffel Action Network in Alice Springs, Mavantwa. We go to our local markets, which are up and running now. It's in theory cooled down a bit. It's 41 today, I think.
It'll be under 40 tomorrow. Yeah.
We've been at the markets every second Sunday, and then we've also we have these community meetings every year. Someone's organised one, and we're probably in April going to have a community meeting themed around how to break buffel feedback loops, and so talking about the problems of fire, slashing and grazing, all making buffel worse, and so having a chat with a panel. And then also here, because it was declared a weed recently, the Northern Territory Government's writing a weed management plan, and so they'll be going through their consultation with a have your say thing, ask the community what they think. So we'll be, I guess, trying to keep up the promotion, education, information and support so that we can get a strong weed management plan and make sure it's got the emphasis on justice and biodiversity.
And are your groups now involved in sort of control? Like I'm guessing about pulling weeds or is that something that really needs to be coordinated with, state or territory or federal sort of programs to be really effective?
No, it was remiss of me. I should have mentioned that in the upcoming. So we've got a great little, there's multiple land care groups. There's Alice Springs Land Care has doing removal and rehabilitation. Basically, you remove buffel and everything springs back by itself. But there's 7 sites with Alice Springs Land Care, and then you might know Olive Pink Botanic Garden. They've got a land care group. So they're all, locally removing buffel and creating sites where the vegetation's coming back. And it's small scale, but as proof of concept that you can bring country back as a source of seeds and a refuge, they're incredible. And we had quite a lot of rain last March, April, and then rain interspersed across the winter months. And so this area just to the northeast of me, we call it Spencer Valley, over about a decade they've been removing buffel. And it was just incredible in August last year, the flowers that came back there. And it was sort of like some event that we, the ABC and others filmed it, and we ended up with 400,000 people watching this video of the beautiful flowers there, and there were people having lots of picnics, and it was just this sort of, I don't know, it's just an incredible thing. And people, after watching this carpet of this green or brown, depending on the year, take over, and then this sudden outburst of gold and purple and music and life, it was just incredible. So there's great work here, and then you're going around Australia, like down in South Australia is leading the way, and the AW Landscape Board in the west of South Australia is really doing work at scale that's stopping the spread and doing it really well. So there's stuff happening, and on ground and advocacy here and around Australia.
It's encouraging that those small scale eradications can work. They need to be backed up, don't they, with ongoing funding, so that that eradication work can happen for 10 years rather than 2 or 3 years in a row, because the seed bank is there. You mentioned rain. Every time there's rain and water moving over land, it's bringing new seeds into these areas that may have been cleared. So it's a never-ending process, trying to keep invasive weeds in check.
That's just such a slog too. Full credit to everyone, and it's a shame that when it's up to a few community individuals to lead the way too often here, where it needs to be. Like we spend hundreds of millions building roads or something. We need to be doing this at scale and drawing upon the beneficiaries of buffel and the public purse, because it's as a land care job, it's pretty hard work, chipping out the buffel, which you can do, but
weed eradication by hand is extremely hard work. Buffel seems to be an order of magnitude more difficult than most. Like, for instance, pulling bone seed down here. But if you've done it for 3 years in a row and then you don't do it the next year, it all comes back. So you've just got to keep integrated pest management. That's what it is.
Yeah, but it's also, don't underestimate the resilience of this place. Once you give, our grasses and things are pretty opportunistic too, and if you can
give
just
them a chance.
It's amazing how once you get rid of a buffel, it's gone. You do have to visit it, but you can turn it around.
So are there patches on the broad scale? We probably should define what we would say would be big. broad scale, I would be thinking maybe a couple of hectares where buffel has been removed, and then the local plants have recolonised and managed to keep the buffel out.
Yeah, for sure. Like that Spencer Valley I was talking about, like it's probably, I don't know, like maybe one, like say a triangle, like a kilometre side. So I don't know what that works out, but it's certainly more than 2 hectares. And the anchor of the Coolabah swamp I was talking about, like that's multiple hectares. Yeah, so along the river.
I'm just having a look. Oh, here we go. I'm just having a look at the Spencer Valley Alice Springs Land Care. Just, there's photo gallery. Sorry, folks. This is where we do it on the fly. I'm going to have to read. I'm going to have to read a lot more on this. On this site. I guess too to frame that question better. I'd be looking at sort of 5-10 year sort of time frame to see how much ongoing intervention is required to keep it weed free. I mean that's always one of the biggest challenges with any of these kind of projects, is that there generally might be funding for a 3 or 5 year period for people to come back and continually do the control, and then when that grant is over and people have moved on to the next invasive weed problem somewhere else, that a lot of the good work gets undone. That's a lesson that we haven't really learned well, or it will pass off to like the state or territory authority, like it'll become parks and wildlife responsibility, and then the next government comes in and goes, "Oh, we've cut the departmental staff by 10% because we need to achieve efficiency," and then those sort of control measures can be damaged. I know I sound like doom and gloom, but that's always what happens. So if it's in community control and they're in charge of the resourcing, I think that's a better solution than waiting for the crew from Parks and Wildlife or Department of Ag or whatever your the relevant department is to come and just maintain the good work that the community did years before. I think that's a model that I think we have seen fail repeatedly. Come on, Adrian. Hope. You got to give me hope.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a discussion around the biological control. I'm
really excited about that. By the way, but then we're not looking at some. I mean, cane toads were a biological control agent. So
yeah, it's funny that there's different, there's many biological control introduced. From my parents' property, they had this bridal creeper, and they introduced some rust or whatever. In the agricultural sector, there are many things introduced, but my understanding is that if done properly with a whole lot of genetics considered up the front and developed over a long period of time, that's going to give us, the cane toad was introduced a couple of weeks after it arrived, as I understand it. People get really flippant about those ones, but then we get too conservative about things like this, where it's a genuine existential threat.
And we do have a much greater knowledge base and system, a toolkit like the the gene splicing and whatnot to alter biological pests and biological control. Sorry, but there can be gene splicing and those techniques on biological pests as well. So we do have a lot more tools available to everyone. But again, it involves really significant amounts of money to get these things done on broad scale. So,
but just the money we're talking about on the impacts to everything is huge, like incomprehensible anyway. And then the other part of that biological control is like I'm saying, like this buffel dieback's out there already, and it does, as I understand, pose a threat to some of our native grasses, like the kangaroo grasses as well. So we kind of don't have a choice. We should be finding out about this, and ironically, not ironically, but the cattle industry is already researching how to stop it, not how to spread it.
Yeah. Well, but that to me would seem to be a suboptimal solution if it is able to target or able to infect indigenous grasses as well, because there would need to be some research on what the levels of fatality or the impact on subsequent recruitment and all those kind of issues would be before we would want to be encouraging the rust to spread if there are other options available. But it might get the nod because it's the cheapest, and people do not value the indigenous species generally. Like, is anyone going to die on the Themata triandra or Themata australis hill? I'm not sure they are. Okay.
And these things are also like, I absolutely agree. Like, that's why you need to research it and need to start now, not decide that you want one and then have to wait 10,000 years. They should be doing that 10 years. They should be doing the research now and then have the policy discussion. But the other part of it is, like as Sarah were keen to emphasise to us, is the biological control gets you to the point of suppression, like, because it's it can't
and that's where mechanical or chemical eradication needs to come in. Either boots on the ground or slashing and or chemical applications or whatever, or bring in goats or something. There's millions of. No, I don't mean let them run wild. You can peg goats on areas to help with, once you've achieved suppression, to stop the ongoing recruitment, because some people won't want to use pesticides. Particularly in areas where they might want to get some organic certification or something like that down the track. So, because this problem, so I'm thinking more broadly. It's going to be a problem in these mixed agricultural zones in other states where the main agricultural activity is not grazing.
Yeah. There's a whole story there which I don't really know enough about, but I understand buffel is, if you're cropping something that's not buffel, then buffel invasion is highly problematic. It's getting into your wheat crop or whatever.
Well, apart from any issues you might have with mechanical harvesting, you've then got the issue of contamination of your crop, and then the value of your crop can go to almost zero. You can only sell it as really subgrade as a subgrade product. So there's so many issues that Buffel throws up. I mean, it's one of the reasons why let everyone know when we were sort of planning this, there were so many things to talk about. I certainly was thinking, geez, I don't even have any idea how to rank them in order of importance. So, particularly to the wider community. I mean, we've all got our own hobby horses. Fuck you, Paul. But Australia's a big place, and there's going to be different priorities in different locations. So, one of the reasons why national strategies are hard to achieve in a country like Australia with a federated system, but also very different industries exploiting all the geographic locations and all the different habitats that have to be considered. So, I certainly don't think it's easy, and and I don't envy the people who have to make the decisions. I just wish they would argue their positions or the decisions that they have come to in more public forums. So people always say, "Yeah, but we held public forums. We held public forums somewhere where farmers went to." Well, that's not enough. I don't think, because the wider community are the people paying for these efforts.
I think it's related. I guess, to me, Buffel is a bit of a reductio ad absurdum of biosecurity not working. This thing, the modest benefit to a small, comparatively small industry, that it was allowed to go unchecked for so long, speaks something to biosecurity arrangements, and essentially, they all the different structures all cascade through the Minister for Agriculture rather than the Minister for Environment.
But we also know the structural problem with biosecurity in the country. Yeah. It's all concentrated on stopping the entry at particular points, right? But that next level of very early introduction, monitoring, and then eradication is just underfunded. I mean, fire ants is a perfect example. Once we knew it was here, there was no real effort to eradicate it. There was some monitoring and reporting, but that relied on citizen science or community input as much as anything else.
That also, I guess, everyone hates the fire ant, whereas one like this, where you get basically the ag sector in the pastoral area anyway liking buffel grass, then we basically hit a roadblock.
Do we know how buffel got here? Is there a definitive? Is that known?
Yeah. So basically, it goes here. There's different species. It was introduced. It came with the Afghan camellias as one group, but then back in the.
But was it purposely brought in, or did it come in some, in some blankets, or because two things. When I was researching this, the reason I do not have in the description or anything the scientific name of buffel grass is precisely what Adrian just said. There's a couple of different species, and I couldn't work out exactly which one we were talking about. So we're talking about a few, and it's much easier to be broad and talk about it in the discussion than to limit what we're talking about. So that's the reason for that. But I couldn't see in my cursory research, Adrian, of a definitive. I think there's some theories rather than really knowing exactly how it came in.
Well, here it's pretty well known. It was there was this. I know there's some up in Broome or somewhere along the Afghan Cameleers, but basically in the 50s, CSIRO was researching it with encouraged by the pastoralists, and then so Murray Downs, White Gum and Elk Hedgerow stations planted buffel grass in 1950-51, and they were done as trials. And then in the early 60s, it started getting spread. They put it around the airport. Dust, the planes could land.
So that was the dust suppression.
Yeah.
So I was clear on that being the use that they sort of first put it to. But where they did the trials, was it then spread deliberately? Like, did they hold the trial and determine that, this is great, this is really great, let's start sowing this as broadly as we can?
Yeah, pretty well. So then between 61 and 71, they trialled it on 31 pastoral stations, and then and around Uluru and Karajuda, which was also very dusty. And then basically it's been spread on pastoral stations ever since. You can buy the seed and spread it from a.
I did see that. I did see that it was available for sale in bulk, and and again, it just boggles the mind, doesn't it? That it's that structural problem where we have control measures that are nominally environmental control for an environmental control issue operating in the agriculture department. But it's the same reason why it's pretty dumb to have agriculture, forestry, fisheries, conservation, environment all jammed into the same thing, or here in Victoria where we put conservation and planning in the same portfolio. So the enemy of conservation is development, property development in an urban setting on the urban fringes. So of course you put them in the same portfolio where one sector or one group of stakeholders has no money and one group of stakeholders has all the money. So I hate to be cynical, but that would seem to me to be a deliberate ploy to ensure that nothing changes.
Yeah. Anyway, I just wanted to say, in the weed of national significance, there's 3 buffel species nominated. They're all Cenchrus ciliaris, Peniciformis, and Setiger, which is the one less around here, I think. So there you go. But there are multiple species and hybrids.
Yeah, and I did see that there's some work going on in different parts of the world to have them resistant to certain biological controls and to chemical controls. So that's bad news too, isn't it?
Yeah.
But wherever there's a buck to be made, someone will do a bad thing. Yeah. I think we will wrap up now. We'll organise a subsequent discussion, and I'll invite Bob Irwin on as well.
Yeah.
No, we'll get the traditional owner point of view presented sort of soon, and we'll talk more about the country from the perspective of the TOs and the damage that is occurring and how it's viewed from a different standpoint. So that'll be coming up in the future. And folks, if you're interested in the night parrot, I got a message from Neil Hamilton yesterday saying he'll be back from his latest field trip next week. So maybe in the next fortnight, or that we'll be looking at by the end of the month. Neil will be back on to talk night parrots, and the technical difficulties that Neil and I had. We've overcome them today because we did everything we would normally want to do with all the visual aids with Neil. We managed to pull it off today without a real hitch. So that's great stuff. Adrian, thanks for giving us so much of your time. Boy, Jingo, see, 2.5 hours, mate.
Yeah, no, thanks very much thanks for your time.
Oh, look,
appreciate you spreading the word.
Well, this is what my time's for. So, and if there's other people that you think or other issues that need to be brought up, because I don't hear about them down here, and there's no way one person can see all the articles or all the social media posts or whatnot of things that are worthy of discussion. So I'm always grateful for any suggestions. That goes for all of you too, viewers, listeners. If there's someone you think I should talk to, or if there's something that you want to tell me, I don't mind if it's constructive feedback. I like, even if it's negative. So yeah. If you want to tell me that I shouldn't say fuck Bob Irwin, just tell me why. Just tell me why I shouldn't say it. Don't just have the first part of the conversation. Let's open it up to a full conversation. Adrian, I hope lots of people check out the Facebook groups, and I hope there will start to be more interest from folks from other parts of the country in the control. Well, let's talk about suppression first. Control's further down the track. Let's just suppress the buffel grass, and a number of times I've misspoken and said gamba grass. That's another massive bloody issue. So yeah, I might have to delve into that.
Yeah.
Have to get James Tresize on, I think, to talk in invasive species and talk to the Biodiversity Council a bit more about these things. So, folks, in the description, Facebook groups, check them out. Find out more about what Adrian and the community in and around Alice Springs are doing. And, hey, you can even plan a trip up there. Or down there, or over there, or across there. I've been to Alice for a long time, but if it's anywhere near as surprising as cool as I found Mount Isa, certainly wasn't somewhere that was on my bucket list of places to visit. But I suspect that Alice and would be just as surprising if you get away from the RSL or the. Where does everyone socialise in town? Adrian, is it the RSL?
There is a couple of clubs. There's a lot of quite a lot of private parties and small little places probably a bit of a cafe culture, I guess. Yeah. Yeah,
that surprised me everywhere I went in the sort of outback towns. We went to how many pretty cool cafes have popped up everywhere. It's probably going to be $100 for a cup of coffee soon, though.
No, that's all right.
In the off the beaten track locations.
50 cents more.
Yeah. Oh, gee. How much are you paying for a cup of coffee there now?
I think they paid $5.50 for a double.
Oh, that's a bargain. Jeez, if I want a large size coffee here now, I'm looking at $7 for a large.
Yeah, it's a small.
At least. Yeah. Okay, folks. Well, thanks for joining us. I hope the feed was going out properly, because we didn't get any YouTube comments, which is very, very unusual. So maybe I need. No, I'm not going to talk about how the sausage is sizzled, but using this new platform, I do set the streams up differently than I used to, and it has me a little bit concerned that because I know we've got people watching, but we're not getting comments. I'm just wondering if the comments aren't working. Anyway, you can let me know at some stage, folks. Adrian, when should we try and do something in about a fortnight's time? Is that a good time frame?
This is about Buffel with the custodian's point of view, or we've also got
Yeah.
the ground. Well, it might be a little bit longer, but I'll do some thinking, and we'll find someone. There's a lot of people who'd like to talk to you. Yeah.
Oh well, I'm doing this every day, mate. So I'm happy to talk to anybody who's got something that they are working on, and that we've got two aspects. We can be political and we can be activist based, or we can be broadly conservation and threatened species birds based. So we've got two avenues to go these days.
Yeah, I'm thinking out loud, but potentially, I don't know if you know, Tracy Guest is the parks manager down in Uluru, and they're very passionate about Buffel down there. So there might be some TOs who.
I'd love to speak to them. I generally shy away from even asking people who work in government, because I generally find that they have to go through such a process to be allowed to speak that
you might be surprised.
I hope I am. Well, they're no longer part of the federal department, are they? So they're standalone, aren't they?
I don't know. They certainly speak without fear or favour down there, anyway.
Yeah, so. I think they're far more independent now. So yeah, that could be good. I know whenever I try and get people on from state-based conservation or environment or land and wildlife or whatever they're called now, we generally have to go through this series of hoops before they're able to come on. I'm generally not prepared to do it anymore. They don't want to do live, and if they're not prepared to do live, that means they're not prepared to answer questions from people who are interested. And if they're not prepared to do that, what's the value in talking to them? They can just send me a press release and I'll read it if that's what they want. That's
great.
Anyway,
thanks very much. Awesome.
Thanks everyone for being with us. I'm Grant. I'm a bird nerd. I'm a plant nerd. I'm a grumpy old bastard. That's Adrian Tomlinson. He's committed activist and buffel grass expert. This has been the Bird Emergency, and not just another podcast. See you later.
See ya. Thank you.